Some encounters require no explanation. No words are spoken, and yet something begins to move in the invisible space between two people. A glance, a shared silence, a strange stillness that suddenly feels sacred before the mind can make sense of anything. Something ancient begins to awaken, not in the body, but in the soul. The man does not understand what is happening to him. Yet something in him is already responding to the presence of the woman before him. It isn't desire in the way we usually understand it. It is not born of sight or sound or surface. He is responding to something deeper, to a vibration that carries no performance, no agenda, no need to be noticed. She is simply there, but her presence touches something in him he did not know was still alive. This is not the result of beauty, charm, or clever words. It is the quiet force of essence, the kind of feminine energy that does not ask for attention, but commands the soul's attention without trying. Carl Jung called this the anima, the feminine principle that lives in every man's unconscious. And when a woman lives in alignment with her true self, not pretending, not chasing, not shrinking to be accepted, she becomes a mirror for that hidden part of him. Without even trying, she stirs the anima awake. And when that happens, he cannot look away. Not because he understands her, but because he recognizes something in himself that he had long forgotten. This is not a strategy. It is not seduction. It is not something that can be performed. It is an invisible current, a frequency that moves beneath appearances, underneath all the roles people play. When a woman has stopped asking to be chosen and has instead chosen herself, her energy begins to speak in ways the lips never could. And that energy is not subtle to the soul. It is undeniable. Have you ever walked into a room full of faces, laughter, movement, and yet found your attention frozen by one person? Not because they said something clever or wore something bright, but because something about their presence altered the atmosphere itself. That is this frequency. The soul does not recognize with eyes or ears. It recognizes by resonance, and resonance doesn't lie. In Jung's view, we are not only shaped by logic or behavior, we are shaped by what lies beneath, by the unconscious forces that move through us. When he wrote of the anima, he wasn't only speaking of a fantasy or idea. He was naming the doorway to emotion, intuition, and symbolic truth within a man's inner life. The anima is not external, but sometimes it is awakened externally, through a woman who is fully herself. And so the man feels pulled. He does not know why. She is not the most beautiful woman in the room. She is not the loudest. She might not say much at all, but he cannot forget her. She has touched something in him that is not shallow, something he cannot explain to anyone else. And the reason is simple. The energy she carries is not made. It is remembered. We live in a culture that teaches women to perform, to smile a certain way, to speak in a charming tone, to dress for attention. And yet, the energy that truly captivates a man does not arise from any of these things. It is the feeling that she has entered a space inside him that no one else ever touched. And she did it without even trying. Jung believed that some experiences bypass conscious awareness altogether. In Man and His Symbols, he wrote that the psyche is not modern. It is millions of years old, a living inheritance from the depths of the human soul. And so when you feel drawn to someone without logic, it may be that they have awakened something ancestral, something buried in your symbolic memory. It is not new. It is familiar. A woman who lives in her truth does not try to look gentle. She does not act sweet to be more likable. She is not concerned with pleasing anyone, and that is precisely why her frequency is so powerful. Because it is real. It is not effort. It is essence, and men, even those who do not know why, sense that truth. It is not her smile that disarms them. It is her presence. There are men who will say, "She wasn't the most beautiful, but I couldn't take my eyes off her." That is not romance. That is energy. That is the anima being stirred. It is the moment a man touches something within himself that has not been touched in years, if ever. It's the moment he realizes that something is rising in him that has no words. Jung wrote, "When an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside as fate." And so, when a man meets a woman who reflects a hidden part of himself, he calls it destiny. But really, it is the unconscious becoming visible. And the reason she leaves such a mark is because she does not come with a mask. She does not seek approval. She is simply herself. This is the kind of woman who doesn't need to say much. Her silence holds more meaning than 100 compliments. She walks into a room and doesn't try to own it, but the room shifts. The air feels different. People feel different. That is the quiet weight of real energy. That is what Jung meant by the aliveness of the soul. Not a soul trying to be liked, but a soul that simply is. And the most striking part of it all, this energy cannot be faked. It cannot be taught in words. It cannot be earned through perfection. It is the natural result of one thing only: a woman who has returned to herself, a woman who has stopped seeking, a woman who now lives as love, not for love. And when she does, she begins to emit the frequency that the unconscious cannot ignore. There are moments so subtle that the world barely notices, yet something profound stirs beneath the surface. A man walks through a space filled with noise, beauty, charisma, all the things people use to be seen. Yet his attention does not rest on the obvious. It drifts towards something quieter. A woman who says nothing, wears no costume of charm, and yet causes his breath to pause for a reason he cannot name. It is not about what she does. It is about what she emanates. She is not louder than the others. She is not more glamorous. But her stillness pulls on something deeper than desire. It is the stillness of a soul that is no longer looking for something outside herself. And that stillness carries a weight that the masculine cannot ignore. Carl Jung spoke of this kind of recognition, not as strategy or seduction, but as archetypal memory. He taught that what is repressed within becomes magnetized when seen in another. This woman has not painted herself with flattery. She has not sculpted her presence to match expectations. She simply is, fully, without apology. And that completeness, the fact that she has stopped contorting to be loved, gives her an energetic presence that moves before her words ever arrive. She is not waiting to be chosen. She is already claimed by herself. Feminine energy in its most magnetic form does not shout. It does not persuade. It reminds. It reminds others of something they've forgotten. The stillness within. The truth beneath the roles. When a woman lives from this place, her energy becomes a mirror. And when a man sees her, he is not just seeing a person. He is seeing a reflection of something in himself that he cannot reach without her presence. This is not the kind of love portrayed in stories where characters chase each other in dramatic loops of attraction. This is a resonance, a spiritual response. Jung believed that human beings are not moved by logic alone. We are moved by the unconscious, by dreams, symbols, and emotional impressions that live beneath the threshold of thought. And the anima, the inner feminine, is not a figure of fantasy. It is the portal to intuition, to feeling, to soul. That is why men often cannot explain the pull they feel toward a woman who lives in truth. She is not easy to categorize. She does not meet all the surface ideals. But she carries something their spirit recognizes. And that recognition bypasses the critical mind. It goes directly to the emotional body and often to the nervous system itself, where the body relaxes in her presence even before the heart knows why. This is why women who live in their authenticity do not need to try. Their energy is not working to convince. It is already aligned. And because of that, others adjust around them. A man may walk past 100 women, all of whom are doing everything right, smiling, performing, captivating, and yet his heart turns toward the one who is not doing anything at all but simply being. Jung once wrote, "The psyche is not of today." He meant that our inner experiences are built on ancient memory, far older than the conscious mind. That is why certain people make us feel something that feels like a past life, even if we met them only yesterday. It is the soul recognizing what the eyes cannot explain. A woman who lives from her center carries that kind of familiarity. It is not mystery, it is memory. And so, the man doesn't know what to call it. He tells his friends, "She's just different." He replays the encounter in his mind, not because of what she said, but because of how he felt in her presence. He remembers a sense of stillness, or truth, or even a quiet safety. What he is really remembering is the moment his unconscious was stirred by hers. This is the feminine frequency that is not created. It is uncovered. A woman does not have to add anything to herself to become it. She only needs to remove what is not hers, the need to impress, to chase, to be wanted in order to feel worthy. When she sheds that conditioning, what remains is her true signal, and that signal is powerful beyond words. This is why Jung never taught how to attract people. He taught how to integrate the self. Because when you are whole, you do not chase resonance. You become it. The feminine that is integrated, that is rooted, that has passed through both light and shadow, emits a field that only the truly ready can stand near. The rest will feel uncomfortable and disappear. And here lies a secret few speak aloud. Most men are not drawn to perfection. They are drawn to presence, to a kind of woman who doesn't try to prove herself, because she is living in the reality of her own depth. That presence makes them want to be near, not out of impulse, but because something in them feels seen. Have you ever felt someone enter a space and everything got quieter? Not because they were loud, but because their energy arrived first. That's the experience of being in the presence of someone who has returned to themselves. And that return cannot be mimicked. It must be lived. Jung called this the individuation process, the path of becoming whole, not in fragments, but in truth. So if you are wondering how to draw in a love that is rooted, start not by reaching out, but by going inward. What remains when you stop performing? Who are you when no one is watching? That essence is your real power. That is the energy that moves through rooms, into hearts, and across invisible dimensions. It is not learned. It is remembered. And once remembered, it never needs to speak loudly again. There are women a man remembers for years, not because they wore something unforgettable or said something clever, but because they felt like something he couldn't lose. They stirred something in him that had no words. And that stirring didn't come from effort. It came from essence, a quiet, powerful frequency that arrived before any conversation took place. She wasn't trying to be unforgettable. She just was. The most powerful feminine presence is not crafted. It is allowed. When a woman stops trying to be desired, she begins to emit a frequency that speaks to something deeper than appearance. It speaks to the hidden emotional landscape of the man before her. Carl Jung taught that the anima is not a fantasy. It is an archetype, a symbolic form of the feminine that lives inside every man's unconscious, waiting to be activated, not by performance, but by presence. When a woman is deeply rooted in her truth, when she is no longer performing sweetness to be palatable, no longer minimizing her depth to be approachable, she starts to vibrate at the frequency of wholeness. And that vibration wakes something in a man that has nothing to do with what he sees, and everything to do with what he feels. A feeling that tells him, I know this. I don't know how, but I do. It is not that she completes him. It is that her presence reminds him of a part of himself he has long abandoned, a softness, a depth, a place in him that knows how to feel. She does not try to pull it from him. She does not ask him to become it. but by simply being herself, she gives him permission to come home to his inner world. Jung believed that when a man projects the anima onto a woman, it often happens unconsciously. He thinks he is falling in love with her, but what he is really falling into is the mirror of himself. If she is authentic, if she lives from her center, she will reflect back the truest parts of him, the parts he needs most, but fears the most as well. This is why it is not perfection that makes a woman unforgettable. It is truth, realness, the unfiltered presence of someone who has stopped trying to be liked and has instead chosen to be whole. She does not smile to gain approval. She does not speak to fill silence. She allows silence to do what it was always meant to do: reveal the sacred. The anima is not sustained by tactics. Infatuation may begin in illusion, but love deepens only in truth. When a woman drops the persona, the performance of being soft, of being agreeable, of being good enough, and stands instead in her full light and shadow, she becomes a living gateway to something eternal. She becomes less of a person and more of a symbol, a reminder of soul. Have you ever felt drawn to someone you didn't understand? Someone who did nothing special, but made you feel like the ground beneath you shifted? That wasn't coincidence. That was soul resonance. It was not her outer image that moved you. It was her alignment, her refusal to shrink. And in that refusal, something in you remembered how to expand. Jung once said, "Every man carries within him the eternal image of woman. But the question is, will he meet someone who awakens it? And will he be conscious enough to realize that what he sees in her is what he must also reclaim within himself? Because if he does, then the relationship becomes more than attraction. It becomes individuation, the soul's unfolding. The deepest kind of love is not when someone fills your emptiness. It's when someone reminds you that you were never empty to begin with. A woman who is not seeking to be completed does not reach out with need. She sits in stillness. She moves from inner fullness, and that fullness makes her powerful, not in force, but in gravity. You do not chase gravity. You are pulled by it. You do not ask why. You just feel its weight. And this is what the feminine does when it is whole. It pulls, not to control, but to align. She does not strategize. She does not seduce. She does not alter herself for applause. She vibrates, and those who are not in resonance simply drift away, while those who are meant to stay find they cannot leave. This is why some men sit for hours asking themselves, "Why can't I stop thinking about her?" It's not because of her looks or her words. It's because of what she activated. She turned on something in him that had been asleep, not because she asked him to change, but because her presence made change feel possible. And so, if you are a woman who has ever been told you are too much, or too quiet, or too deep, remember this: men do not forget the women who live in truth. They may not always be ready. They may not always stay, but they always remember, because when you show up as your whole self, you leave a mark not on his memory but on his soul. This is the call of the awakened feminine. Not to be adored, not to be liked, not to be chosen, but to become. Become the woman who no longer fears her power. Become the woman who is not waiting to be found. Become the woman who has remembered herself so deeply that others remember themselves in her presence. There is a difference between a woman who reaches for love and a woman who already lives inside it. The former searches outward, hoping to be met, hoping to be filled, fearing she is not enough without it. The latter turns inward. She becomes the space where love arises. Her presence does not ask for completion. It offers completion. And that, Carl Jung would say, is the woman who has stepped into her own soul. Love that is hungry can never satisfy. It always reaches, always seeks reassurance, always trembles when met with silence. But love that is whole moves differently. It does not chase, nor does it manipulate. It radiates, and in that radiant stillness, Something ancient in the masculine becomes calm. Not because she demands anything, but because her frequency says, "I need nothing from you to know who I am." Jung taught that we project our unresolved wounds onto others when we haven't yet faced them within. And so, a woman who has not yet turned toward her own emptiness will unconsciously bring it into her relationships. Her energy may be beautiful, even generous, but it will carry a silent signal. Please love me, so I can love myself. A man may feel drawn in the beginning, but eventually he feels a weight he cannot name. The weight of trying to be enough for someone who hasn't yet chosen herself. In contrast, when a woman has loved herself into wholeness, when she has stopped making love a destination and made it a home within, her energy changes completely. She no longer tries to impress, she no longer needs constant confirmation. She lets the energy speak for her, and that energy either draws in or dissolves, but it never clings. It has nothing to prove. Have you ever been near someone who made you feel quieter just by being near them? Not because they told you to be calm, but because their presence was already calm. That's what happens when someone is no longer negotiating their worth. Jung would call it integration, the coming together of all parts, so that nothing is missing and nothing is exaggerated. This creates what he called the self, not the ego but the soul's full expression. A man does not fall in love with this kind of woman because she flatters him. He falls in love with her because her energy reminds him of a time when he was whole. A time before wounds. A time before the ego was built. Being near her is not romantic in the cliché sense. It is sacred. He does not want to own her. He wants to stand beside her and remember what he forgot. The woman who is in love, not with someone, but with herself, with life, with the divine rhythm of her own being, enters a room with a different pace. She is not hurried. She is not loud. She does not check who is watching. Her gaze moves slowly. Her words are few, but her presence fills the air, and people notice, even if they don't know why. The contrast is striking. One woman tries to charm, plays roles, adjust her behavior to win affection. She is light on her feet, careful with her words, constantly scanning for response. She might be beloved briefly, but she is also quickly forgotten. The other woman, the one rooted in self, may speak little, but her words echo. She may not seek attention, but she commands memory. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And when a woman has stopped performing for affection and started becoming herself, she no longer walks into a room asking to be seen. She sees herself first, and when a man meets a woman who sees herself fully, her shadow, her softness, her fire, her grief, he cannot help but slow down, because her self-recognition invites him. This is not about dominance. This is not about submission. This is not about power in the traditional sense. This is energetic sovereignty. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the inner marriage, the reconciliation of opposites. A woman who is whole within herself does not need a man to bring her light. She welcomes his presence, not to complete her, but to co-create with her. This kind of love that is already full, cannot be manipulated. It cannot be tricked into settling, and it cannot be attracted through tactics. It is not interested in games. It is interested only in truth. And so, those who come near such a woman must rise into that truth, or they will quietly disappear. Because her presence does not permit anything that isn't real. If you've ever felt the difference, you know it in your body. One kind of energy makes you feel responsible, like you must hold everything together. Another makes you feel more grounded, more yourself, more human. That is the difference between a woman who is hungry for love and a woman who is love. The first pulls, the second open. So ask yourself, what kind of love are you living from? Are you still waiting to be chosen? Or have you chosen yourself so completely that love is no longer something you seek, but something you embody? Jung would say that our outer world reflects our inner divisions, and when we heal those, we no longer attract what drains us. We attract what resonates with our highest wholeness. This is not the story of a woman who needs a man to feel worthy. This is the story of a woman who has become so anchored in her essence that when a man enters her orbit, he does not feel needed. He feels invited. Not to fix, not to lead, but to stand in his own fullness beside hers. And that is what makes love unforgettable. There is a mystery in the kind of woman who makes people pause without knowing why. It is not because she is always light or always joyful. It is because she is real, light and shadow, softness and depth, radiance and rage. She does not edit herself to remain digestible. She does not clip her wings to appear safe. She has walked into the rooms of her own inner darkness and returned with a kind of wisdom that can't be learned, only lived. Carl Jung called this the integration of the shadow, the conscious recognition of the parts of ourselves we were told not to feel, not to show, not to be. Anger, grief, longing, mess. Most of us hide those aspects, especially women, because they are labeled too much. But a woman who begins to embrace what she once buried stops living as a mask. She begins living as a whole presence. From a young age, many women are trained to be agreeable, polite, soft, always kind. They learn that to be loved, they must minimize themselves. That sadness is weakness. That rage is shameful. That imperfection is failure. And so they smile when they want to scream. They stay quiet when they long to speak. And in doing so, they fracture. They become performative versions of themselves, just to be accepted. But something inside knows when the performance is unsustainable. A moment comes when she grows tired of being seen only in parts. And so, she begins to turn inward toward the emotions that were exiled. She lets the anger rise. She lets the grief wash over her. She no longer avoids the mess. She listens to it. She becomes it. Not to drown in it, but to finally understand it. This is not collapse. This is awakening. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This woman does not pretend to be perfect. She does not chase healing as an image. She allows herself to fall apart, not as failure, but as ceremony. Every breakdown becomes a sacred returning, and through that return, her energy transforms. Now, when she enters a room, she does not need to say much. Her presence says everything. She is no longer chasing light to avoid her shadow. She carries both, and that makes people feel something they rarely do, safe to be human. She does not require others to be cheerful. She does not demand that men be invulnerable. Around her, the real self is welcomed, because her own self is no longer fragmented. Men are not drawn to her, because she's always easy to be around. They're drawn because her presence carries depth. She can sit with discomfort. She does not flinch when someone reveals their rawness. She does not try to fix what is broken. She simply stays, and that kind of staying with truth, staying with pain, staying with the whole, that is what makes her unforgettable. Think about the people who have moved you most. Were they always smiling, or were they deeply alive? Did they impress you with perfection, or did they disarm you with presence? Jung taught that the shadow is not evil. It is simply what we have not yet accepted, and the woman who accepts herself fully stops needing to be accepted by others. That changes her vibration entirely. She does not beg to be loved. She does not avoid rejection. She simply shows up as she is. If her truth is too much for someone, she lets them go. Not in bitterness, But in clarity, she no longer sacrifices her soul to be chosen. She has already chosen herself, and that self is not always graceful. It is not always composed, but it is always true. This woman does not fall into the trap of trying to be what a man wants. She knows that if she becomes a reflection of someone else's expectations, she loses herself. So instead, she lives as herself. And because of that, only the man who is ready for depth, ready for his own shadow, ready for truth, only he will remain. The rest will fall away. And that too is part of the blessing. She becomes a mirror for the brave, and a challenge for the unready. She does not apologize for this. Jung would call her a symbol of the self, the wholeness that arises when all opposites have been brought into harmony. She does not hide the parts of herself that once made others uncomfortable. She honors them. She lets them speak. And by doing so, she becomes a woman who is magnetic, not for her beauty, but for her depth. This is the woman who is unforgettable, not because of the way she dresses or how she laughs, but because of the space she holds, the sacredness she exudes, the quietness that carries strength. When she sits with someone, they feel seen, not by her approval, but by her presence. She listens differently. She sees beneath the surface, because she has gone there herself. To be this kind of woman is not to win more love. It is to become love in its most unedited form. She is not healed in the way people imagine. She is healing. She is messy. She is open. She is real. And that reality vibrates at a frequency the unconscious cannot resist. A frequency that says, you don't need to be perfect here. You just need to be true. There comes a moment in a woman's life where something shifts. She no longer bends her truth to be loved. She no longer edits her words to remain soft. She no longer hides her longing behind a polite smile. She becomes the woman who is not seeking, because she has found her way home, not to another, but to herself. And in that return, something powerful happens. She stops chasing love. She begins vibrating it. Carl Jung would call this the birth of the individuated self, the soul that no longer orbits around external validation, but radiates from an inner truth. This woman has shed the roles that once made her feel worthy. She no longer performs to fit the idea of the good woman. She lives as she is, not as who she was taught to be. And when she walks into a space, people feel it, even before she speaks. This is not arrogance. It is not withdrawal. It is energetic certainty. She does not need to ask, "Am I enough?" because the question no longer lives in her. She has answered it by being herself again and again, even when it cost her approval, even when it meant standing alone. That choice, to stay with herself, has become the foundation of her magnetism. She has nothing to prove, not because she doesn't care, but because she knows that anything real will recognize her truth. And anything that does not recognize it was never meant to stay. Jung wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." And so she no longer resists the loneliness that comes with standing alone. She understands it is often the doorway to power. There's a kind of silence she carries now, not the silence of hiding, but the silence of self-possession. She doesn't rush to fill the space. She doesn't interrupt her own knowing. She lets the room come to her, because she has become the kind of presence that draws rather than demands. She lets life respond to her frequency, not her fear. Have you ever met someone who didn't speak much, but the moment they walked in, the air changed? That is the power of someone who no longer seeks to be chosen, who no longer waits for love to find them, who instead embodies what they once chased. That person is not magnetic because of tactics. They are magnetic because of inner alignment. In Jungian terms, this is the moment when the ego ceases to be the center. The self becomes whole. The woman who once asked, "What must I do to be loved?" now asks, "What parts of me still need my own love?" And in answering that question, She stops fragmenting. She becomes one. She is no longer triggered by rejection, because rejection no longer defines her. She is not here to audition for affection. She is here to radiate her truth, and that truth cannot be contained in roles or personas. It is a living, breathing force, and those who are meant for it will feel it without needing to be convinced. Men do not always understand this energy, but they feel it. She makes them pause, not because she flatters their ego, but because she doesn't. She stands so fully in herself that they are invited to rise into themselves or quietly step away. There is no manipulation. There is only clarity. She is not the woman who sends 1,000 messages to be seen. She is the woman who sends one signal, a frequency, and that signal is, I am whole. I am not waiting. I am not pretending. I am here. If you are not in resonance, you will drift. If you are, you will stay. She doesn't make that happen. Her vibration does. Have you ever reached a point in your life where you realized the only thing you ever needed was already inside you? That you didn't need another compliment, another approval, another yes to feel worthy? That's what this woman lives every day. Not as a performance, but as a return. She is not immune to pain, but she is no longer defined by it. She feels it, moves through it, and returns to herself. Over and over again. That repetition of choosing herself in the quiet has built an unshakable field around her. Not of walls, but of energy, and only those who know how to meet her there are allowed in. This is the woman who no longer tries to be chosen, because she has chosen herself so fully that anyone who enters must bring something real. Anything less simply falls away, and the men who encounter her feel it immediately. They know, I cannot lie here. I cannot play here, and in that knowing, they either step up or disappear. Because this kind of woman does not beg. She does not chase. She does not compromise her soul for fleeting warmth. She stands in the center of her being, vibrating love, not because she wants to be loved, but because she is it. And that is what makes her unforgettable. There is a kind of woman who lingers in a man's memory, long after her footsteps have faded. Not because she said the perfect words or wore the perfect dress, but because her stillness reached a part of him that had gone untouched. He may not realize it at first. He might call it mystery. He might call it chemistry. But deep down, he knows. She reminded me of something I lost inside myself. This remembrance is not logical. It doesn't arrive through conversation or shared interests. It arrives through feeling. A quiet, undeniable pull that cannot be explained to others. Carl Jung would say this is not about the woman herself, but about what she represents. When a man encounters a woman who has integrated her soul, she becomes a mirror of the anima, the inner feminine he has yet to embrace. She does not try to be remembered. She lives so deeply in her truth that her energy leaves a signature. It stays, not as a memory of what she did, but of what he felt in her presence. Her silence is not empty. It is alive. Her gaze is not intense. It is steady. Her energy says, I have nothing to prove, and because of that, I am unforgettable. The men who meet her often describe her in contradictions. She was soft but powerful, quiet but impossible to ignore. What they are trying to name is not her personality, but her frequency. And that frequency awakens something inside them that they had long silenced. The part of them that feels deeply, that yearns, that understands without needing words. Jung called this inner recognition symbolic consciousness. It is the knowing that bypasses intellect and reaches into archetype. She becomes, for him, not just a woman, but an embodiment of a spiritual memory. Not because she tries to be symbolic, but because she is. She is living her truth so fully that she naturally channels something larger than herself. And here's the paradox. The less she performs, the more powerful she becomes. The more she allows herself to exist in her natural rhythm, sometimes joyful, sometimes silent, sometimes stormy, the more she stirs others, because she is no longer responding to what the world wants her to be. She is responding only to what she really is. This is why she doesn't have to raise her voice to be heard. She doesn't have to move quickly to be felt. Her presence is like gravity, subtle, but inescapable. A man might not even notice it at first, but when he walks away, he finds himself thinking about her. Not her face, not her words, but the way he felt in her presence. That feeling is not desire. It is remembrance. He remembers a softness within himself, a longing to feel again, a hunger to sit in silence and not be afraid. And that awakening doesn't come from her effort. It comes from her alignment. She didn't ask him to remember. Her beingness reminded him. This is what Jung meant when he said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." She doesn't look outward to be validated. She looks inward to understand. And that kind of woman teaches without teaching, loves without clinging, moves without forcing. And that is the energy a man cannot forget. He may try to move on. He may distract himself with other faces. But her frequency has already entered his unconscious. And unless he is willing to face what she reflected, he will continue to feel her without resolution. Because she didn't just touch his desire. She touched his soul. And here's what's beautiful. She does not chase him. She does not remind him. She lets him go if he must. Because her worth is no longer tied to who stays. She is no longer trying to be chosen. She has already chosen herself. And from that place, she trusts that what is aligned will remain. What is not will dissolve. This woman may not be remembered for her looks. She may not be remembered for her charm. But she will always be remembered for her energy. The feeling of standing near someone who had nothing to hide, and therefore left nowhere for others to hide either. She does not fight to be unforgettable. She simply is. Because truth, once embodied, does not need to shout. It becomes a resonance that echoes far beyond the moment. And a man, even one not ready to meet her in that truth, will one day remember her as the one who made him want to come home to himself. There comes a time in a man's journey when he stops looking for perfection and starts longing for truth. Not beauty without depth, not kindness without strength, but a woman who stands in her wholeness, unmasked, unedited, alive in her essence. She may not be easy to understand. She may even challenge him. But her presence does something no one else has done. It calls him back to himself. Carl Jung often wrote of the soul's deep hunger to return to its forgotten parts. He called it individuation, the journey of becoming whole by embracing both the known and the hidden self. And when a man meets a woman who has walked that path herself, her energy becomes more than attraction. It becomes an invitation to heal, to awaken, to remember. She does not try to inspire him. She does not push. She simply is. Her stillness says, you do not have to become someone else to be loved. But you must become honest. That quiet truth disarms him. Not because she makes him feel superior, but because she makes him feel seen. And in being seen, he must choose. Rise or retreat. This is not about dominance or emotional performance. This is about frequency. A woman who has come home to herself begins to emit a vibration that only the ready can stand near. Not because she rejects the others, but because her energy no longer negotiates. It simply resonates, and what is not aligned falls away without force. She no longer asks to be chosen, because she no longer lives in the field of scarcity. She is not waiting for love to arrive. She is living it. Every gesture, every pause, Every silence is steeped in the fullness of someone who no longer doubts her worth. And that kind of fullness makes her unforgettable, not for what she offers, but for who she is without trying. This is the woman who doesn't plan how to be magnetic. She becomes magnetic by healing. She doesn't strategize love. She lives love. She doesn't need to convince anyone of her value. She carries it quietly, like breath, always present, always felt. And men sense it. Even if they can't name it, they feel the difference between hunger and wholeness. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely," and that is what she has done. She has faced the shadow. She has made peace with the grief, the rage, the doubt. She has not become invincible. She has become intimate with her humanity. That intimacy gives her strength, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that holds. And so, when a man meets her, he may feel both awe and fear, because her energy leaves no room for pretending. He must bring his own soul to the conversation. Not just his words, not just his intentions, but his inner world, his brokenness, his silence, his longing, because she is not here for surface. She is here for depth. This is the final truth. The woman who loves herself becomes the mirror that shows a man what he still needs to love within himself. She does not fix him. She does not chase him. She simply invites. Her life is the invitation. Her alignment is the doorway, and his soul, even if he doesn't understand it yet, knows when it's being called home. She does not force love. She is not desperate for connection, but her presence is so rooted, so clear, so alive, that the man who is ready will not walk away. Because something in him will say, "This is," not because she gives me something, but because she reminds me of everything I forgot about who I could be. And that is the kind of woman the world forgets to teach us to be. Not pleasing, but whole. Not agreeable, but aligned. Not sweet for approval, but fierce with presence. She is not here to be adored. She is here to be herself. And from that place, love finds her, not out of longing, but out of resonance. If you've made it this far, perhaps you feel it too. The quiet pull to come home. Not to someone else, but to yourself. Because the woman who no longer runs from her truth doesn't need to seek anything outside. She becomes the place where truth begins. And the man who feels her vibration knows, this is not a woman I want to possess. This is a woman I want to become real beside. So stop asking how to be chosen. Stop wondering if you're enough. Begin instead with the only thing that ever mattered, your truth. That is what makes you magnetic. That is what makes you rare. That is what makes the right man feel, "I don't want to leave this." Not because you held on, but because your soul whispered something his soul could not refuse.